Hello, my name is Dr. James Slaymaker, research in film and new media at the University of Southampton. My current research focuses on digital technology, the essay film, and contemporary European cinema. Today I'm going to present a paper titled The Age of Visible Machines is Over, Navigating the Simulated Image, Epistemological Uncertainty, and the Waning of the Index in the Late Digital Work of Harun Farocki. I'm happy to be part of the 2023 Interactive Film and Media Conference. Thank you for inviting me to share my research. Although the term essay film has been in use since the 1920s to describe a particular strand of non-systematic experimental non-fiction cinema, and its usage has particularly gained currency from the 1990s to the present day, there remains no single concrete consensus regarding exactly what an essay film is. Features such as voiceover narration, the use of archival footage, and the physical presence of the director within the text have all been identified as features often present in essayistic filmmaking. Yet I argue that such a taxonomic checklist of formal features is insufficient to describe the essayistic impulse in cinema and why it is valuable. One or more of these elements may certainly be present within an essay film, yet it is unnecessary for all of them to be featured for a cinematic text to be considered essayistic. To better understand what an essay film is and how it communicates meaning, it is necessary to look back to the origins of the term essay in relation to literary discourse in the writing of the 16th century French philosopher Michel de Montaigne. It is important to note that Montaigne did not use the term to classify a genre of writing, but rather to describe his own intellectual activity, the process of essaying. Each section of Montaigne's magnum opus Essays is not called an essay, it is called a chapter. Each chapter focuses on a different subject that Montaigne essays through his writing. In using the term essay to describe his process, Montaigne evokes the Latin term exorgium, which originally referred both to the act of weighing various goods and to the act of an apprentice practicing their craft, gradually honing their skills through direct experience. By drawing on this term, Montaigne implies that he is not an authoritative expert on the subject he meditates upon, but merely a curious party testing ideas, proposing new avenues of thought, and passing on his tentative reflections to the reader for further contemplation. Montaigne encapsulates this aspect of his methodology when he tells the reader, "Could my soul once take footing, I would not essay but resolve, but it is always learning and making trial." Another aspect of Montaigne's concept of essaying that it is important to consider is that throughout the book, he reflexively wrestles with the possibilities and the limitations of written language itself. The issue of representation and how the means of representation influences the author's communication is at the forefront of Montaigne's reflections. As Michel Foucault observes of Montaigne's practice in the Essays, one no longer attempts to uncover the great enigmatic statement that lies hidden beneath its signs. One asks how it functions, what representations it designates, what elements it cuts out and removes, how it analyzes and composes. Montaigne does not treat what he calls the flimsy medium of words as a neutral instrument through which he may simply record his mental activity. He actively calls upon the reader to think about the nature of language and its capacity to articulate human thought. In the 1958 article, The Essayist Form, Theodor Adorno draws on Montaigne's model of the essay to emphasize its importance in challenging positivistic forms of non-fiction literature. Adorno refers to the essayistic method as methodically unmethodical in the sense that it does not operate according to systematic axiomatic principles. Instead of beginning with a clear proposition and then proceeding to prove this thesis in a clear and linear manner, the essayist engages the spectator in an open intellectual experience. In Adorno's words, the essay coordinates elements rather than subordinating them, and therefore functions as a constructed juxtaposition of elements orchestrated around transitions which disavow rigid deduction in the interest of establishing internal cross-connections, something for which discursive logic has no use. The radical potential of the essay, Adorno argues, is rooted in the fact that it thinks in fragments just as reality is fragmented, and gains its unity only by moving through the fissures rather than by smoothing them over. It is not the role of the essayist, then, to outline a clear linear argument leading to a fixed predetermined conclusion, but to place into dialogue varied thoughts and reflections in an open field of interrelations, ultimately leaving it up to the viewer to actively intellectually move through the fissures in the determination of an essayistic meaning. Considering all the principles of essayistic discourse discussed so far, it is the contention of this paper that it is more useful to think of the essay as a dynamic artistic impulse rather than as a genre in the traditional sense. Furthermore, as an open field of experimentation that reflects on its own textual strategies, articulates complex thought through disjunction and fragmentation, and engages the audience in a shared intellectual experience, the essayistic tendency is not restricted to the medium of the written word, and it may be transposed to other forms of art. Two propositions are central to this paper. The first is that digital tools of production, post-production, and spectatorship have directly influenced the formal construction of the cinematic essay in the 21st century. The second is that because the cinematic essay foregrounds the filmmaking apparatus and reflexively addresses the means of its own production, the digitally constructed cinematic essay holds the potential to provide valuable insights into the aesthetic constitution and the cultural impact of digital media. Since the development and proliferation of digital imaging technologies, a significant amount of scholarly debate has been devoted to the ostensible waning of the index in the age of new media, which is ascribed to the fact that the digital image is based on binary code as opposed to the physicality of film frames. The digitization of visual media, according to such a line of thinking, has led to the connection between the image and the pro-filmic world being fundamentally altered. Charles Sanders Peirce theorizes the index as a direct and verifiable trace of an object's presence. In the Pearson model, the index uses some physical contiguity with that object to direct attention to that very object. Applying his theory of the index to the field of photography, Peirce argues that a photochemical photograph functions as an indexical sign of the pro-filmic event it depicts, as the process of capture involves light-striking photosensitive chemicals contained on the surface of a frame, spatially organized by the lens. This means that at the moment the photograph is taken, photochemical emulsions create a tangible physical link between the filmed record and its real-world object. Echoing Peirce, Henri Bazin, in his seminal study What is Cinema, writes that the distinctive feature of the cinematic image is the privileged connection it shares with real-world phenomena. He writes, the photographic image is the object itself, the object freed from the conditions of time and space that govern it. In contrast, the digital image exists as a set of binary codes stored on a hard drive, a series of mathematical abstractions, not a fixed chemical record contiguous with space and time. In a study published in 1992, William Mitchell expresses his anxiety regarding the fundamental epistemological break from the real represented by digital technology, claiming that the rise of the format will soon bring about a post-photographic era in visual art. According to Mitchell, the essential characteristic of digital information is that it can be manipulated easily and very rapidly by computer. Computational tools for transforming, combining, altering, and analyzing images are as essential to the digital artist as brushes and pigments to a painter. Much of the scholarship on digital media published since this dystopian proclamation has echoed Mitchell's concern with the non-indexicality of the digital image. Barry Scott argues in his recent study, A Philosophy of Cinematic Art, that a large part of the reason why the rise of digital technology has generated such heated rhetoric regarding the true status of images is that while all analog images are created through a process of photographic transcription, a digital image may be produced through 3 different production methods. It can be generated by recording pro-filmic light values, which are then translated into computer code and contained on a hard drive. It can be the result of captured light values being extensively manipulated through a computerized editing program. Or thirdly, it may be synthesized completely ex nihilo through the use of advanced computer modeling programs, allowing the user to create intricate multi-layered landscapes and objects which have no real-world referent. In the remainder of this paper, I explore how Farocki's late works mobilize essayistic strategies to investigate the ontological nature of the digitally mediated image, the role of computer simulations in contemporary audiovisual culture, and wider anxieties regarding the waning of the index and the ostensible loss of the real in the era of digital filmmaking. Farocki's multi-part essay project, Parallel 1 to 4, explores the ontology of the digitally synthesized image through an extended focus on images extracted from video games. Farocki materially quotes audiovisual material from a range of contemporary commercial gaming products, including LA Noire and Far Cry 3, as well as from classic games from the 80s and 90s, such as Pitfall and King's Quest. Farocki particularly lavishes attention on minute, seemingly insignificant details of the diegetic environments featured in these games. Blades of grass, droplets of rain, leaves being blown by the wind, the undulations of water on the surface of a lake. These pictorial elements are typically relegated to the background during gameplay. They do not play a significant role in the unfolding of the game's narrative, and so the player is not encouraged to dwell on them at length. They are primarily designed to flesh out the visual space in which the action takes place, to sustain the illusion that the player is navigating a fully realized, immersive, and coherent three-dimensional environment. By removing these elements from their original scaffolding and focusing on them at length, Farocki encourages the viewer to reflect deeply on their composition, their materiality, or lack thereof, and their relationship to the photochemical image capturing practices. Rejecting a structure of linear progression, Farocki combines audiovisual fragments from different time periods into new audiovisual constellations, both spatially, positioning found images side by side within the same composition, and temporally, positioning found images one after another in sequence. Farocki has described this editing strategy as soft montage, as it calls upon the viewers to critically consider the relationship of an image to the one that follows as well as the one beside it, a relationship to the preceding as well as to the concurrent one. The result, as Rick Warner observes, is that the montage retains the sense of trial that distinguishes the detail-orientated work that a cutter undertakes at the editing station. Rather than directly relating his meditations on digital image culture to the spectator in a didactic fashion then, Farocki calls upon the viewer to adopt a spirit of intellectual inquiry and think critically about the chosen simulated images and the interrelations he draws between them, by removing them from their original context and arranging them into new, surprising fields of relation. At various points in the series, soft montage is used to compare and contrast the primitive graphics of early computer games, consisting of relatively simple geometrical shapes arranged to broadly approximate the appearance of natural landscapes, with the hyper-detailed textures of 21st century video games. In the former case, on-screen space is mapped as a two-dimensional grid which permits elementary exploration across the X and Y axis, whereas the latter images display multi-layered on-screen worlds realized with such incredible detail that the observer may be perceptually uncertain whether they are looking at a simulated image or a photograph with a real-world referent. At other points in the series, Farocki deliberately confuses the viewer's epistemological certainty further by placing side-by-side different stunningly nuanced digital images which replicate the appearance of natural landscapes without identifying their original sources. In such cases, it is uncertain whether we are looking at a digitally produced photograph of an actual object with a corresponding real-world referent, a photograph that has been digitally manipulated in post-production to the extent that it may not even resemble the original real-world referent anymore, or a synthesized construct that has been produced within a computer system based on nothing but the creator's imagination. In such cases, the aim isn't to task with the viewer with correctly identifying which image is based on reality and which is newly constructed, but to highlight the fragility of ontological certainty in an era when cinematic images are predominantly circulated in the form of binary code, and the manipulation of these images is easier than ever. However, although Parallel 1 to 4 acknowledges the heightened ability of modern digital modeling systems to produce increasingly lifelike simulations of the external world, it does not simply present a teleological narrative celebrating technological advancement. On the contrary, Farocki is also interested in exploring the fissures, the glitches, and the other points where the illusion of the game world breaks down. In one sequence, Farocki begins by showing a medium-wide shot of a three-dimensional virtual bush. At first, it appears striking in the nuance of its pictorial detail, but Farocki, mobilizing the virtual camera eye, then zooms in closer and closer to the surface of the construct. As the virtual camera eye gets incredibly close to the surface of the virtual bush, the texture of the leaves decreases in resolution, appearing no longer realistic, but notably pixelated and blurry. The virtual camera then pushes in further still, past the exterior surface, and the bush is revealed to be completely hollow inside. The immateriality of the simulation highlighted by the fact that the animators have clearly not taken the time to render a part of the image that the spectator is not supposed to encounter during gameplay. It is jarring that the virtual camera eye can so effortlessly push through the surface of the bush to be positioned within the interior of the plant. It does not disturb the exterior leaves, and it does not brush aside any of the branches as it moves forward into the bush. On the left side of the screen, there is still an image of the bush framed at medium wide, still appearing startlingly intricate and complete in its density of detail. However, now positioned next to this image is a shot from inside the interior of the virtual bush on the right side of the screen. This reveals this to be merely an empty dome-like construct. It becomes apparent that, although the animator of this image has clearly devoted a considerable amount of attention to crafting the surface texture of the bush, the veracity of the illusion breaks down when the virtual camera eye is directed towards an aspect of the diegesis that is incompletely rendered. Parallel 1 to 4, therefore, constantly reminds the viewer of the immateriality of the virtual simulations, their grounding in the immateriality of binary code, and their status as algorithmic constructions rather than automatically captured material traces of real-world light values. In Serious Games, Farocki also examines the ontology of the digitally synthesized image, though in this project the filmmaker expands his findings to consider the material consequences of the increasing use of computer simulations in 21st century US military systems. First exhibited as an installation piece, but later released as a 4-part series of videos on Farocki's personal website, Serious Games engages with a variety of digitally synthesized images to interrogate the centrality of interactive simulations within army training programs and therapy sessions for military personnel struggling to overcome the trauma they experience during combat. Any images that appear in Serious Games that weren't sourced from computer-generated simulations are recordings of either military personnel engaging with the simulations or technicians designing, building, and/or marketing the simulations. Despite featuring no direct images of real-world combat, Serious Games manages to articulate a scathing critique of American imperialism. Indeed, Farocki's decision to build the project around this gaping structural absence is vital to his criticism of the use of advanced digital technology in modern strategies of warfare. As Anders Imberg Peterson observes, Serious Games works against the immersive mode fostered by the simulations themselves, instead causing the simulated images of repurposes to turn opaque and to begin to appear as images. By fragmenting images of these simulations, drawing the viewer's attentions to flaws in the programming, highlighting the economic factors driving the production of the programs, and presenting several shots next to each other simultaneously, Farocki illustrates how essayistic filmmaking may be utilized to interrogate these methods critically, and therefore encourage a more active and skeptical form of spectatorship. As Serious Games suggests, simulated images have become an integral part of the perpetuation of modern warfare, not merely a means of representing it. Although the training programs may be artificial, the real-world effects they create are very real. Farocki reflected on this dissonance in an interview conducted during the release of Serious Games. Somehow, these images are very close to an ideal type. I think that they are asking reality to be as calculable as these systems are. Of course, there can be some contingencies and so on, but already the ambush must be behind the bridge. The extensive use of simulations before and after the moment of combat itself, Serious Games suggests, fosters an inaccurate perception of war amongst those who participate in it. As Halpern argues, one of the significant adverse effects of relying heavily on digital simulation programs in contemporary warfare is that soldiers are being conditioned to never experience war as pain or trauma. As military personnel are increasingly tasked with navigating simulations of war zones, they are trained to perceive real-life situations as being analogous to the virtual environments in which there are no genuine stakes, details of the on-screen worlds may be tweaked, and the user can master pre-programmed events with relative ease. In this paper, I have discussed the essay film as an experimental boundary-pushing experimental mode, which launches a philosophical inquiry into its chosen subjects while simultaneously reflecting on the nature of cinema itself. Focusing on the late works of Farocki, in which digitally synthesized images are extracted from a range of sources and subjected to a rigorous process of deconstruction, I illustrated how essayistic strategies can be used to reflexively explore technological change. Thank you for your time and attention.